So moving on, the chair becomes speaker. So Shujun is now going to give us a talk about other opportunities from different research councils, both in the UK and elsewhere, keeping with the international theme. So Shujun heads up the ACE at Kent. Over to you, Shujun.
Give me a second. Let me share my slides. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so and again, it's me again. So as Peter said, I'm not swapping rules. I'm not speaker, and Peter will chair the session. And our first talk is from British Council, so mostly focusing on single founder. And so we thought it's probably useful if I give a general sort of talk about other founders. And but of course, I actually have a slides on British Council as well. Just repeat a bit about what Jin said. And so hopefully this talk will give you a bit more knowledge about other funding bodies and also about some tips about how you could benefit from those opportunities. And this is not limited to the UK and but beyond the UK, because this is also in the international context. And the first, of course, I do want to give a disclaimer. So all the information provided in this talk, because I'm not from a founder, I'm not from any founder actually. So, and okay, I probably from University of Kent, our institute actually offer some funding as well. If you think exactly, I can explain more officially actually about the Institute of Cybersecurity for Society if there's internal funding, but mostly and the information presented in this talk is my personal knowledge, understanding, and opinions. So please do actually understand that there are errors, inaccuracies, and some information might be outdated because this funding landscape is just evolving so fast. And so please do always check the official sources and check with your organizations, research and innovation and services, and before you take an action. Okay. Okay, good. So what I want to do is I want to start with some general tips, and then I will go through some categories of funding bodies and according to my knowledge, so that actually you can get a sort of a big picture of what are out there. And the first thing is there are many. There are indeed many, and only when I started preparing the slides, I realized there's so many. I just really can't prepare them in just a few days. I actually probably need a few weeks to really do it properly. So there's a lot of organizations providing funding opportunities to researchers. And so many funding opportunities are actually interestingly exclusively for or open to ECRs. And we have some examples later on. I think Jen also mentioned some for British Council. And some funding opportunities are not actually directly for ECRs, but you can still benefit in different ways. And don't only think about the UK, or more broadly in the past, and even now, we are still participating in the EU funding scheme. And don't just think of the UK and EU, and actually it's beyond. In many other countries and regions, there are also funding opportunities, and particularly from your home country or region. And many of you probably are more familiar with the public bodies like British Council and or UKRI and other bodies, but don't just think about those large and more visible public bodies as funders, but there are many other funders from industry, learned societies, and NGOs, charities, and even universities themselves. And those opportunities are not just about research, but many about innovation, some about education, and some about exchange, some about events, and some about travel funds, and some about equipment, if you really need something to do experiments, and some about scholarship. Many of you are doing a PhD, actually funded by some PhD studentships, and some others about awards and prizes. And at all levels means that from the university and even a unit within university and all the way to to international. And another set of general tips and is around deadlines. And so calls and often has a deadline, but there's also something called open calls, which hasn't got a deadline, and you just submit when you are ready. And for course, and often they are so-called pre-release, and information about some courses are coming, and without full details yet, but they have some level of details, and in some cases they have a predefined or promised deadline, which then you can plan your future activities accordingly. And for instance, for EU course, and often they have program which defines even 1 year ahead, or even several years ahead. And some calls are repeated regularly. So this means that you could actually predict quite accurately, and in some cases would be roughly, and when the future call, particularly the next call, will be, so that you actually can prepare accordingly well ahead. And if there's a deadline, and clearly it's actually crucial to know this as soon as possible and as early as possible, and ideally before, actually, so that you can start preparing and talking with people. And some calls have a defined scope, and this is often for those with deadline, because they want something to be done, and they think that it's really important and urgent, and so this is why they set deadline for researchers to address it. And so, and many funding bodies actually run so-called scoping events, and because when they define scope of course, and particularly theme course and with deadlines, and they really need to know what are the right topics and challenges and areas they should really cover in the call. And so participating in those kind of events actually help you to be part of the definition process of those calls, of course, in the future, and sometimes a year ahead. And another set of tips I want to share is about actually talking with people and getting information from others. Right? It's super important to actually talk with others, and including your supervisors and your collaborators and the peer ECRs and your PhD students in the same lab and university or group, and other researchers and in whatever ways. Only by actually talking regularly with other people and regularly, and when you meet them, sometimes and ad hocly, and then you will get more information about funding opportunities and events. And the one thing I would like to particularly highlight that do not rely on your supervisors only, because many of you PhD students have the sort of habit of those information. You assume that the supervisor knows everything, and they will tell you everything and when it's ready. But actually, they often do not know all the opportunities and events. And sometimes they do, but sometimes they are just because they are more focusing on course directly for them rather than for ECRs, and there are a lot of ECR oriented funding opportunities. They don't actually regularly monitor, and they are generally to be there. So they can forget things. Even if they actually saw something, they just forget to share, and then it probably forgets forever. And so, in addition to not rely on your supervisors, actually you should do something even more proactive, and you should actually approach your supervisors and saying that I want to contribute, and you can propose ideas. You say that what about we do something like this, and I can do it during my PhD study or the project UKRI, and but we can do something after that. And then you can also bring context, right? Collaborators, industry collaborators, and so on and so forth. And then you can actually create new projects with your supervisor, rather than just wait until your supervisor saying that, hey, actually can you help on this and that. And another thing I want to highlight is that many universities, I think probably almost all, if not all, and they have research and sometimes innovation together, services, or sometimes they have something called information officers, and they actually compile courses and disseminate them regularly internally. And so do subscribe to them and read them, and of course read them quickly to find the relevant ones. And if you are not aware of this, ask your supervisors, and normally they will know whom you should talk with to get the information. And in addition to that, you can also actively actually subscribe to funding bodies and email alert services. So many of them actually have that, like UKRI, and you can just put your email address in, and then you will be sent the information regularly, which often, sometimes about news, sometimes about funding costs and other things. And of course, some funding bodies do not have email alert services, or sometimes maybe you get too many email alert services, so you find it a little bit overwhelming. And then you can also plan to visit the funding body's website and to check the open calls regularly. But of course, you need to be familiar with the website so that you know where you go to every time when you check, because your time is limited. So you want to make sure that you make your use your time efficiently. Okay, so these are some tips, and I hope they gave you some ideas of how you can plan and take actions on being more informed, and also preparing actually for funding applications, or actually get information or think about what to do. And now I will actually give you a list of different funders, and it's by no means complete, but hopefully they will become some sort of a list which will inspire you to go deeper to find even more complete list, which I would like to even hear from you if you have something more. And the first one, of course, I just want to repeat the Policy Council, and as Jane actually detailed in her talk, and it's probably the most important organization in the UK in the sense of international collaboration and so there are websites, so policycouncil.org, so please do use that to get more information. And the next one I would like to talk about is UKRI and the UK Research and Innovation. So this is probably the biggest and the most important funding body in the UK, at least for cybersecurity as a topic. And the website UKRI.org. And so UKRI actually currently has 9 sub-bodies, and so I highlighted 4 of them, and because these 4, according to my knowledge, and they are more involved in funding cybersecurity-related research, and as you can judge from the topic, and hopefully you will see immediately why this is the case. The other ones sometimes also has relevant, course or project got funded, and but you also probably can judge from the topic, because they are relatively more on different kind of areas, which will be just more sort of overlapping partially and sometimes slightly with what actually cybersecurity researchers doing. And for UKRI grants, so the general rules are, and only eligible researchers from eligible organizations can apply as something called the principal investigators, PI, or co-investigator, which is called CI or COI. And so this effectively means that the PhD students and RIs, which is the majority of ECRs, and some ECRs are lecturers, and they actually can lead. And so PhD students and RIs can't actually co-own or lead a project. However, and the PhD students and RIs can actually be something called a researcher co-investigator, and so RCI or COI, and or a named researcher. So this can be part-time or full-time. So the RCIs basically are supposed to be an active contributor of the proposal, and in many different ways. And named researchers is really just someone who is named. And you don't have to be an active contributor, but normally named researchers can be immediately, hired on the project once the project is successful. And UKRI does have special schemes which are exclusively for ECRs. And so I gave some examples which are actually shared by my UKRI contacts, and I believe all of them are open, I believe. So, and the last one is particularly useful because it's about a forum. Everyone can subscribe to it and participate. So please do and register for this ECR forum so that you can hear more about future opportunities from UKRI. And another important funding source related to UKRI and ultimately actually funded by UKRI are something called research networks, research centers, research hubs, and something called network pluses. And so let's explain the first term. Research networks is basically a special project funded by UKRI, which normally for building a particular research community around a topic. And mostly they are about supporting, community-facing events and providing, resource, for the community. And so based on that research networks, and so there's a new concept called research network pluses. And so these are basically the standard research networks plus additional funding for the community to conduct commissioner research. So basically they normally have costs, saying that there are some research problems, and we want the community to actually send proposals so that you can actually, solve some of the problems. And so this kind of, and of course, research centers and research hubs normally are set up via special calls, and many of them are national. Some are sort of a number of them across the country, but they are normally quite large with multi-million funding. And these kind of research networks, research centers, research hubs, and research network pluses, and they often actually, because they have often a pot of money and awarded by UKRI and for community, and they actually often regularly issue funding calls for different things. And so many of such actually bodies or actually have cybersecurity at the core or actually cover some related topics. And here is a list of some of the research networks, research centers, hubs, and network pluses, and cybersecurity related. I might have missed some, but these are the a number of quite highlighted ones. And I will share the slides and as well, and so that you actually have the links, and so that you don't need to take a picture or immediately write them down because it's quite a bit. And this list probably will be expanded. If any of you actually know any others which I didn't list, please do drop me an email if you want me to improve this. And the next area of funding opportunities are clearly from European Union, and as many of you know, European Commission actually has a very large research and innovation funding scheme, and the current one is called Horizon Europe. The previous one is called Horizon 2020. Some of you might have heard about it, and so they also have both open calls and themed calls, and they also offer fellowships for ECRs. And there are also things like incoming training networks and actually for future studies. And ECRs actually can be involved in EU projects and in many different ways, and even including as a co-coordinator. So co-coordinator does mean that you don't really own it. There normally will be a academic who own it, but then you can be the one who is actually helping that person own it to manage it. And I personally know one postdoc who actually was co-coordinating a large European project, and that actually set up, the career path of that researcher very well. And eventually, he actually went on to be an academic, and now actually he's already a professor. Actually, so in this space, and you will see that there's a huge international collaboration elements involved because all the European projects require a minimal number of countries from the European Union and or from something called associate countries. And so that there's actually even monetary elements. You must collaborate with the people from other countries. And another one funding source I really want to mention, and I have to mention, is NCSC, National Cybersecurity Center. And because this winter school, is funded by NCSC, as you all know. And so NCSC, of course, is part of the GCHQ, as you all know, and so it's provide future studentships, and some of you, I believe, are actually funded by these studentships. And NCSC also have ad hoc project funded, and one of the most famous ones probably Cyber Body of Knowledge. And there's also, for the GCHQ Fellowship and last year, and also they have a regular fellowship as well. And they have events, and the events are probably more for ECRs and like this one. And in addition to directly funded projects or events by NCSC and GCHQ, and they also have 4 cybersecurity research institutes, and many of you probably heard about them. And so I listed all of them. I'm sorry, I think for the last one, I forgot the acronym. So it's RISE. And so these research institutes actually regularly organize events and issue funding calls. And so you can also pay attention to them so that you get cybersecurity related events and calls, so you can benefit from. And NCSC also jointly actually do jointly funding with other funders, and often with UKRI, for instance. And regarding innovation, and there's also 2 important ones I want to mention. There are actually many others I can't cover. And so the first one is Innovate UK, and if you remember, this is a part of UKRI, but this is part of UKRI particularly focusing on innovation-related funding. And the project of Innovate UK must be led by a company, and up to 30% can go to academic partners, mostly. And there are open competitions called SMART. They're also seen should be themed competitions, which are ad hoc on a specific topic with a deadline. And both have a deadline, but the smart deadline are rolling, I think, quarterly. And as ECRs, you are probably can't lead unless you are already lecturer level, and but you can always participate as a researcher, and you can contribute to the proposal writing and so on and so forth. Another scheme I want to mention, particularly for cybersecurity, is something called CyberASAP. And so CyberASAP basically is a program funded by DCMS and delivered by the KTN and Innovate UK jointly. And so that is a program for university researchers to transfer more market-ready research into real world. Okay, so that is something really you should consider if you really think about after you finish your PhD study or your current postdoc study, and you want to go into industry, even set up your own company, particularly because you have some exciting research you want to really make some products. And another group I want to also mention is about industry, and large ICT companies and often actually have regular calls, and many of you know Google, Amazon, Facebook, Samsung, Microsoft, Huawei, and so on. They actually have regular calls to researchers on research proposals, and many of them also have so-called research arms, and so that they conduct the research, and they're also looking for collaboration regularly. And industry is a bit different from other funders because industry actually is much more flexible, and you can always talk with them. And if you know someone, it's better. Even if you don't know them, and you can still approach them. There are different ways you can fund people. And by talking with people in industry, you actually can potentially get ad hoc funding from them because you have a solution or you have a technology, and they have a problem. And when you talk with each other, you say, okay, let's come together to do something, and then they will fund money for you. So that is often quite an interesting one. And in this context, so don't just think about the large ICT companies, and they are also actually, I should not say large ICT companies, actually large companies. It can be financial sector, for instance. But for small and medium-sized industries and SMEs, and sometimes they can fund you as well, either as part of collaborative projects because they put match funding, or they sometimes can directly fund your research because SMEs sometimes has sufficient funding to do something as well. And there may be other things I forgot. And the last slide, I believe, and this is, and so I'm trying to list many other funders which I can think of at this moment. And there are many other public bodies, and they actually have funding calls. And the DCMS, we already mentioned, for CyberASAP, and ICO have actually open research calls on privacy-related research, and the Home Office, and of course, mainly on crime, law enforcement, but cybercrime would be a very relevant one for Home Office and digital forensics. And the Home Office actually often have calls related to that. And Ministry of Defense, and particularly through the DSTO, and also another scheme called DASA. So they provide opportunities of working with the defense sector in the UK. And IPO, which is intellectual property protection, and Neutron Fund, and I think Jia mentioned in her talk. And the Turing scheme is for UK researchers to go out to do exchange. And FCDO and ODA, this is actually in the context of supporting developing countries, and mostly done through this kind of foreign relationship context. And don't forget that this is not just about the UK, and other countries and regions, we have public bodies with similar funding schemes. And so if you are particularly interested in working with a particular country, and please do look at that particular country, and there will be other public bodies which are relevant. And particularly home country or region, and there should be public bodies, and don't forget embassy. So embassy actually sometimes have special schemes, and often in the context of scholarships and travel fund and prize and awards. And charities is also quite a large category, and with some charities, actually large charities actually have a lot of funding, like in the UK, Liverpool and Wellcome Trust are probably the two biggest among the biggest charity funders, and they also have schemes for ECRs. And worldwide, there are many charities, and some are actually related more narrowly about cybersecurity, subtopics, and you can actually look for them more ad hocly. And finally, of course, your own organization, and many universities and many different parts of the university, like faculties and schools and departments, research centers, institutes, they often also offer internal funding opportunities, like Institute of Cybersecurity for Society at University of Kent. And actually, we have recently announced internal funding scheme, which is also open to ECRs. And we actually have a sandpit on this Thursday, and to get people together to discuss that. So that is also another opportunity which often can get you started. Yeah, this is my last slide. So I will stop here, and I hope I still have a few minutes for questions. Thanks. I will share the slides.
Thank you, Shujun. You do have a few minutes for questions. So if anyone has questions, then please submit them via the web portal, as it were. I'm not seeing anything there yet. So I had a question, Shujun. So you've got some really useful pointers in there, I suppose, and some really good links. I guess when you first starting out, right, as an ECR, you got your first lectureship, it was quite daunting thinking about how to write your first grant. Have you got any tips on like how to even start going about doing that first grant?
Yeah, for me, it's basically started from fellowship, because that seems to be always a quite standard route. Because if you are fresh, PhD graduate, or if you have done a few years of postdocs, not independent, meaning that you are doing, you did projects of your supervisors. And then the first step would be actually thinking about some independent proposal of doing a fellowship, which you can own yourself, which normally give you a salary, which then you can sort of become semi-independent. Normally you need a host, academic, but if you have your own project, you bring your own money, even if you're a host professor, you sort of became semi-independent. So I started that route. So basically, my first, I would say, funding success is basically a postdoctoral fellowship in Hong Kong, actually. And so that gave me some level of independence. And then I do what I decide to do. And then, of course, I found a hosting professor. And then I moved on to apply for two other sort of fellowship. And the second is more a visiting researcher fellowship. It's in Germany, actually. And after that, then I have a number of fellowship successes that gave me sufficient, practices of writing proposals. And then I can go on to write other proposals. But some other people might, benefit from a different route, like the one I mentioned for the European route. So if you are postdocs, if you have a very active, research group, and with a lot of European, for instance, project going on, and why not participate in some of them first, and as just a researcher, not really, initialize anything, but then you have some good ideas, and then, propose to your professor that you initialize something, right? That is actually happens quite often in the UK as well, in Europe. Then you can start taking, ownership partially of the larger grant, and then you can move on that way. So I saw success in that route as well. I think different people can have different,
Yeah, I agree. And I guess the key point there is your point about practice, right? The likelihood of getting your first one funded is quite low because it's very competitive. But I guess it's, keep at it. It's all practice. Hopefully you'll get some feedback from the reviewers if it's not funded. Make sure you respond to that and
start from something small.
Yeah.
So, because in the UK, the good thing is there's a lot of small, funding scheme, like the one I mentioned, the institute at Kent. And it's a small amount, a few K, and you can have some very nice idea. You can do some very relatively small piece of work. You don't need to write a big proposal, but that gives you the opportunity of practicing it, getting review, and think about why reviewers say what they say, even if it's non-successful, and you learn something, and you can move on from there.
Absolutely. So just time for one quick one. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but there's one quick one on the web, which is if you want to commercialize your PhD project, do you have to have a working proof of concept, or is an idea enough?
Not necessarily. So the Cyber ASAP is a good example. The Cyber ASAP supports you to first do a market evaluation, and then will give you money to build a prototype, actually. So that means that if you have done PhD, research, and you have some research prototype, let's put that way, which is not good enough, and apply to Cyber ASAP, and then you can get some commercial thinking by looking into the market evaluation process. And then you can propose to do this kind of prototype development. And once you pass that phase, and then, of course, then this is about getting investment. That is a bit different story. But there are funding available to do just that.